Well, it's nice to see you on YouTube. I thought I would respond to your video because I've had some thoughts that were sort of bouncing around in my head lately. And I still consider myself somewhat of a pragmatist, but I think I'm beginning to move a little beyond pragmatism in some sense. Um, you know, when I read philosophy, I tend to read enough philosophy until I feel as though I've sort of had my fill. Um, and that usually happens when it becomes clear to me what perspective the philosopher is writing from. And once I understand that, then I understand a lot about that character and their view on things and how that has led them to particular conclusions. Um, Now, a pragmatist would state that, you can learn a lot from other people's observations, that everyone brings their observations from their particular perspective into the discussion, and that their conclusions may not necessarily be correct because there may be some stuff that's obscured from their perspective. Now, of course, perspective implies that there are going to be certain features that are prominent and certain features that are obscured. And to the extent that this is true, this is going to distort any conclusions that come out of that analysis. To me, that's indisputable. What I feel happens once we gain enough perspective, once we're able to consider many ways of looking at a particular issue or problem, is we begin to understand how those factors can be quantified and expressed mathematically. So I see philosophy as an analytical step towards science that ultimately is destined to science, that's understanding things mathematically is where the analysis is heading, where progress is made. The ultimate destination for our analytical thought is to be able to express something mathematically. Now, until that point, of course, some of the mathematics may be very difficult, and possibly some of it will be beyond our human capacity to analyze. It's very, very complicated, some of this stuff. So we have to understand that there's some limitations to our ability to create these abstractions within our consciousness to be able to conceive of these things, okay? So there are some limitations to the complexity of the abstractions we use for being able to comprehend reality. But I think if those limitations did not exist, I think that the ultimate destination would be math. And that's to the extent that a particular perspective tries to take more into account, that is what produces value. Not an account that's, for various reasons, tends to make some features prominent and some features obscure for perhaps a desired conclusion. And we certainly know that philosophers are capable of that, right? So, particularly when they're trying to sell a particular policy, and we see that a lot from the right, at least, that they tend to push their own perspective because they have a desired conclusion, and they tend to completely omit other factors that may or may not be important. Okay, so I think I said in a different video that my sort of core belief about existence is that it's rooted in mathematics. That we exist simply because it is possible mathematically for a system to have the relationships between dimensions that our universe does, and because it's a mathematical function, it just simply exists. It's getting something for nothing. We exist within a mathematical domain that is basically just comes into existence through mathematics. Okay, so I think ultimately there's deep significance to the fact that science is to a large extent rooted in mathematics also, and I think to the extent that we can explain things mathematically, that more or less determines, for me anyways, how complete a person's perspective is on that particular topic. So that's kind of my pragmatism yielding into kind of a functionalism. So getting into the mathematics, once you've got the mathematics and you're able to do some sort of analysis and some experimentation, then understanding some of the principles, maybe moral principles, ethical principles, or politics, or things like that, to me becomes understanding the consequences of certain actions or policies. And to me, that is one of the critical things that pragmatics are concerned with. Idealists very rarely consider consequences. They have a particular set of laws and rules, and they feed in their input and they get a particular output, and it's all very sort of syntactic and formulaic without considering the consequences of what they're doing. Right by construction according to them, not necessarily by looking at what consequences could result. So I'm very much concerned with consequences, and I think that there are some very basic principles that should drive philosophy of politics and social justice and a lot of things. And I think there's intrinsic functionalism that we need to achieve, and that functionality is driven towards the requirement for survival, and not just survival of the individual, but survival of the various organizations that individual belongs to, including his family, his city, his nation, the earth, the biosphere. There's a lot of consideration that has to go into understanding what the consequences are to those various strata of organization that the person belongs to. And there's certainly the possibility for conflict of interest between the various strata, and we see that all the time in games like Prisoner's Dilemma, where at a high strata it makes sense for cooperation, but at a lower strata, if you compete and you defect, then you gain an advantage as an individual. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why we've got this idea of social contracts, that we make a bargain with the state that we cooperate at a higher social strata because it enhances the functionality of not only us as members of an organization, but us as individuals. So it enhances our potential for survival, okay? Which is, in the end, I think a very good way of measuring the success of a particular politics. It's hard to beat survival as the criteria for success. All right. So, anyways, I just wanted to spew that for a little while and give you something to chew on. So, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.